Welcome to Let's Talk with Aaron Johnson. I'm Aaron Johnson, and thank you for taking the time to listen to my blog and basically just listen to me talk. Um, but if you have anything that you want to talk about, be sure to put that in the comments so that we can discuss that at some point. And hit the like, follow, subscribe, all those things. Hit that little bell so that you get notifications when I put a new video out. And what we're going to talk about this time is tariffs. That's what that's currently what's going on in our current political climate. And I know that there's a lot of fear with that. And I'm not an economist, but I can give you some, as I say, constitutional thoughts on this. Uh, if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that consider myself a constitutionalist. That means that the Constitution is our founding document for our country, and therefore uh, it's the basis of everything that our government does. And I firmly believe that the Constitution was written correctly, was written to pretty much cover just about every situation. And we have three branches of government in that Constitution. Now, the branches are all divided. We've talked about this in my first podcast. Uh, Feel free to go back and listen to that because it's really kind of fun. Um, but this week we're going to talk about tariffs. Now, growing up, I heard, we've all heard the stories of tariffs and people will the countries levying those, and it's a way to try to control what comes into your country to kind of benefit your own people. Well, a lot of countries have extensive tariffs, taxes on what we import to those countries. And yet we have very little, if any, on what is coming in our country. Now, this has created a huge problem because a lot of American companies have decided that, they can build things cheaper in a foreign country and then ship them back here because we don't charge for it. The problem is that creates issues with employment, uh, and the ability of Americans to be dependent upon themselves. Now, if you were listening to our first episode, you know that Congress controls the purse of the country. Okay. Basically, what that means is that they levy taxes. They levy um, fees and tariffs. Okay. That is stated in Article 1, Section 8. And in part, the good thing is all these things that I'm going to talk about. If you look in the comments, I have links to each of those where I found those on online, and you're more than welcome to pull those up and look at them and read them yourself. I recommend that. Please do so. I keep my own personal thoughts out of most of this, and just try to speak with facts. But I'm unlike most, or some people. I want you to check up on me, and if you have something that goes different, let's talk about it. Okay, I got no problem with that. Um, and in our first um, podcast, we talked about laws, how laws are made and how they become a law, and that's by the president signing them. Congress passes them, the president signs them, and then the courts um, decide the legality, illegality, um, all the different parts of that law. The courts do not make a law. But if they make a decision on a case, it then becomes something that other cases and is built on. It's called case law. Um, and this is interesting because in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, it says, in part, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Now, so that basically tells us that, according to the Constitution, that only Congress can levy tariffs, correct? That's what it says. But don't forget now, we have mentioned that Congress can pass laws, can write laws, and then, as they agree, it's passed to the president, and the president signs it. All right. So having done that, um, Congress has passed laws, and it's a good thing too when you really think about it, because this way it's one person in charge of this. And Congress, over the years, has delegated to the president the ability to levy tariffs. And this goes, and it has been reviewed by the courts, okay, by the Supreme Court, mind you. And the Supreme Court has said, yes, they have that ability to give their power to the other branch. And I know that one of the biggest arguments right now from certain members of Congress is that the president doesn't have that power. Well, according to the Constitution, no. But according to law that was passed by Congress, he does. Or she, if should it be a female president at the time. They have that ability to levy tariffs, which in the grand scheme of things, he levies those tariffs to fulfill his duties to uphold the Constitution and to defend the country against all threats, foreign and domestic. And allowing a country to ship goods and products into our country without taxing them is not a good thing for our country, because then if the people in our country, the manufacturers in our country who manufacture those things, eventually lose out. Does this make sense? Because they can't, we just can't produce those products as cheap as they do in other countries, because other countries have no minimum wage law. They have no set hours that people can work, a 40-hour work week. We actually didn't have that until the Industrial Revolution. Used to be kind of just like they do in some of these other countries. Just you work till the boss tells you to go home, and sometimes he never told you to go home. But over time, Congress gave the president expanded powers on its behalf to enact tariff policies. And it has gone to court several times. Being the first is Wayman v. Southard in 1825. That's right, I said 1825. And Chief Justice John Marshall noted that Congress could not delegate powers that are strictly and exclusively legislative. But Congress had the ability to grant other powers as needed. This is his ruling in this case, because what they argued that Congress couldn't give that power away. The difference between the departments undoubtedly is that the legislature makes the executive executes and the judiciary construes the law. But the maker of the law may commit something to the discretion of the other departments, and the precise boundary of this power is a subject of delicate and difficult inquiry into which a court will not enter unnecessarily. This is what Marshall wrote, okay? Then in 1892, the court defined these boundaries that Marshall talked about in the case in 1825 in a case called Field v. Clark. Marshall Field and Company objected to tariffs placed on sugar, molasses, coffee, tea, and hides under the Tariff Act of 1890, which directed the president to place such levies when other nations use tariffs that the president may deem to be reciprocally unequal and unreasonable. Marshall Field claimed Congress had improperly granted legislative powers to the president. And in this case, the court decided against Marshall Field and Company by saying that in the majority reply, which became what we called case law earlier, said the president was acting in his executive role, executing a congressional policy. So what this is what he wrote. What the president was required to do was simply an execution of the act of Congress. It was not the making of law. He didn't make the law. That's what he's saying. He was the mere agent of the lawmaking department to ascertain and declare the event upon which its expressed will was to take effect. Does that make sense? So, what they said in this case in 1892 was the president isn't making the law. He's merely acting as the agent of Congress because Congress said under the Tariff Act of 1890 that that the president can levy tariffs to even out the tariffs. So if a country has 50% tariff on something that we ship, then we add that same level to what they send to us. Okay? So there's case law. That's the first one. And then Congress, over the years, Congress has increasingly taken a less active role in levying tariffs, especially after the 16th Amendment's ratification in 1913 that led to a federal income tax. So the 16th Amendment, we don't want to talk about that because that's where we got income taxes. After the income tax was established, then Congress really just kind of took their hands off of tariffs because that was how the government got their money, was through tariffs. Okay. And then once they got income tax, then they're like, you know what? We'll just let the president deal with it. And that's pretty much the way it has been. And then in 1934, Congress passed the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act, which gave President Franklin Roosevelt the ability to change tariffs rates by 50%, 50%, and negotiate bilateral trade agreements without additional approval from Congress. Since then, the president has mostly controlled and executed tariffs policies as defined by Congress. Now, we're kind of looking at, okay, so what are some of these laws that has allowed the president to levy these taxes, these tariffs? And the Reciprocal Trade Agreement of 1934 gave the president the authority to adjust tariff rates, but also the power to negotiate bilateral trade agreements without receiving prior congressional approval. Now, we talked about this before, see, because Congress has to approve all treaties. Okay, so they gave away some of that power to the president when it comes to levying tariffs and such. That is the Reciprocal Trade Agreement Act of 1934. Okay, so now we've got that. And then they also, in section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, um, it authorizes that Trade Expansion Act of 1962 authorizes the president to ask the Secretary of Commerce to determine if goods are being imported in a manner that threatens national security. And President Trump, in his first and now his second term, he has done this for steel and aluminum. And to some degree, I agree, because if we don't have steel, we can't build our ships. We can't continue to manufacture the goods that help us defend our nation. Okay. So these are good things. Um, but Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 does not require the president to follow the secretary's recommendations, but it does permit him to take alternative actions or no actions. So it doesn't limit him to follow just what that Secretary of the Commerce has to say. So if he listens to him and then he thinks that maybe he's got it wrong, he can make his own decision, or and do what he wants to do, or he can choose to do nothing and just leave it alone. He's not bound by that. And also, in the Trade Act of 1974, the act allows the president to impose tariffs. This is Section 201 of the Trade Act. Okay. This act allows the president to impose tariffs if the U.S. ITC, the International Trade Commission, finds that an import surge is threatening a U.S. domestic industry. Okay, so here's where we go to countries charging tariffs to us or us not giving a tariff and are we'll say on clothing, okay, and it interferes with us being able to properly and correctly make clothing to compete against their cheaper clothing. So it gives the president the power to levy tariffs to even up the amount. So say you want a $20 pair of jeans, but you buy jeans that are made in Taiwan for $5 because there's no tariffs added to it. And they obviously can manufacture them cheaper. We've talked about this before. Than we can in the United States, and the cheapest we can make jeans is 20. Okay, because we have all the laws that require us to pay insurance, and then all the businesses and blah blah blah. So, which Taiwan does not have. This is just an example. I'm not picking on Taiwan. I'm not picking on any countries. This is all just a hypothetical example. I'm just giving you something real life here. So the president can levy a tariff on those jeans to bring them up to an even amount. Does that make sense? It's pretty good plan, in my opinion, because it helps the country and it forces these nations to look at what they're doing. And if you look, we're letting them send their stuff to us for free. But anytime we send our jeans to them, not only is it $20, but they're adding a tariff to it. So we're selling those jeans or trying to sell those jeans in Taiwan for 50 because of the tariffs that they have levied on us. If the ITC decides that yes, this is creating an issue, then the president can make a decision and create, he can take action accordingly, including placing tariffs. This is from the Trade Act of 1974, Section 201. Now, the tariffs imposed under Section 201 are not meant to be permanent, and the actions have a limit of 4 to 8 years, basically the limit of the presidency, which is kind of cool. Okay. But then also within the Trade Act of 1974, we have a Section 301. It's a long bill. I printed off the different parts I'm talking about, and I mean some of these things are like, wow, they're way up there. Um, it's a lot of pages just for the parts I'm talking about, like 8 or 9 pages printed, real thin print, real small print. But in Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, it allows the United States Trade Representative to authorize tariffs on foreign countries that restrict U.S. commerce in unjustifiable, unreasonable, or discriminatory ways. Does that sound like what is currently going on? It does, doesn't it? Um, so these tariffs aren't intended to hurt the United States consumer. They are a fulfillment of the oath of office for the President of the United States when he said he would protect the United States, defend the Constitution, and protect the United States from all threats, foreign and domestic. So he's simply fulfilling his obligation to the people who elected him. Yes, I can understand where it could feel scary. It could feel bad. It could feel like things are going to go bad. And and honestly, from time to time they have. Okay. Tariffs aren't easy. The paying of tariffs, I mean, right now it's tax season. Look at your taxes that you're paying this year or that you paid last year that you got to justify to the government. That you either paid too much, not enough, or, they're always real quick to tell you didn't pay enough, but they never are real quick to give you back the money if you paid too much. Isn't that kind of weird? Kind of sad, isn't it? But I mean, it is what it is. Um, and I know, I really do. I understand. The tariffs are scary. And a lot of the people from both sides are using fear mongering. And that's why I try to let's just talk about it. Let's just talk about it. Let's try to get the facts out there. And am I an expert in this? No. But do I try to educate myself? Yes. So, and so the USTR confirms such behavior after an investigation. The president has the discretion to allow the United States Trade Representative to impose tariffs for at least 4 years. That's under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. Now, there are 3 provisions that allow a president to act on his own to impose tariffs without an investigation by a different individual or a different organization or a different part of the government, like the Secretary of Commerce or the International Trade Representative. And that is the International Emergency Act of 1977. You have to understand that this act is a quick, down and dirty way for the president to do what needs to be done to protect the country. Okay, so sometimes that means either completely cutting off the use of, or the sending of some, of allowing things to come into our country, or of us sending things out, or making them pay for it, adding tariffs. And the act allows the president, this International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, it allows the president to declare an emergency under the National Emergency Act and then use his extensive economic powers, those given to him through the Constitution and those given to him through laws passed by Congress. And those laws have been checked, rechecked, and checked again by the Supreme Court to say that they are illegal. Um, and then use his extensive economic powers to regulate or prohibit imports. Right. That's what he does, right? And I know a lot of people have been throwing a fit because President Trump in February of 2025 was the first president to ever actually use this act. He did not act illegally. He did not overstep his bounds in the Constitution. He did not overstep Congress. He didn't bypass Congress because Congress passed this law. Congress wrote this law and both houses approved it, and both houses sent it up to the president to be signed in 1977. That was long before Mr. Trump became President Trump. So you can't say that, I mean, there's no way to mentally say that it's okay to hate the president for what he's doing. Uh, when he announced his tariffs on Canada, China, and Mexico in February 2025, he enacted that act. He responded in that act. And it was a quick way to get these countries to communicate with the United States on some form of footing that was equal. And it was a great negotiating tool. It really was. Um, was that his purpose? I don't know. I'm not President Trump. But I can tell you the results worked out pretty well, didn't they? For our nation, which is, again, a fulfillment of his oath to the people who elected him. Okay. And then you got Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. Look at all these different acts and these different sections of these acts and these laws that Congress passed. See, so if you want to get mad at the president, you have to get mad at the Congress in 1974, and the Supreme Court in 1825, and in 1890 the acts, the Congress in 1890, and the 16th Amendment and the Reciprocal Trade Act in 1934, and 1962. So, and then in 1974, so if you want to get mad at the president for what he's doing, you have to go back to these Congresses and you have to be mad at them because they're the ones who gave him the power by passing the laws. He's only following the law. It's that simple. That simple. I mean, how can you not? How can we not understand that? And the reason we don't understand that is because there aren't people sitting like I'm doing and trying to explain this to you. It took me all of 3 hours to find all of this information. 3 hours to find all of this information. I have all of those sections printed right here. And they'll be, those will be added in the comments under this video. Um, so let's go on here. So Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, which allows the president to enact temporary tariffs to address, now listen to the wording here, large and serious United States balance of payments deficits, or certain other situations that present fundamental international payments problems. You see this? You see where this is going? Okay. So this act, this is the wording in the act, large and serious United States balance of payments deficits. With these tariffs, whatever they turn out to be, and he's still, these countries are now talking to him, trying to even this out because their economies depend on being able to ship their stuff cheap, preferably free into our country to be sold for whatever they want to charge for it. But if he adds tariffs, then they have to up the price. And they're not going to be able to make it. Their economies of these countries can't survive like that. Okay. So, and then also that's in the Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. And then you have Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930, which authorizes the president to enact tariffs on articles produced by or imported on the vessels of foreign countries that discriminate against U.S. commerce in certain ways. So, having said all of this, I know I haven't alleviated the fear that we all have what these tariffs are going to do to our pocketbooks, okay, and to our wallets and to our bank accounts. But at the same time, I hope that I've managed to be able to alleviate some of the fear, okay? Because the fear, he's not the president, the current president, Mr. President Trump, is not overstepping his bounds. He's following laws passed by Congress, and the Constitution allows Congress to have made those laws. So, therefore, President Trump is acting in the best interests of the United States and the people who elected him. Now, even if you didn't vote for him, he's still protecting your interests because he is the president of the United States. And as such, he took an oath to protect all the citizens of the United States. It may be uncomfortable. It may be tough. It may hurt a little bit. But in the long run, it's going to be better. It's going to be better. I mean, technically it can't get much worse, right? I mean, stuff's a little expensive right now. But imagine if these tariffs do what they were intended to do, which is to protect United States manufacturing and help the United States manufacturing grow and become better, more self sufficient. Back in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, American made vehicles were the vehicles that everybody wanted. People in foreign countries wanted American made vehicles. Why is that? Because American made manufacturing, let's just be honest, American made manufacturing is superior in every form, in every fashion. Why is that? Because you get what you pay for. Yes, we have a high labor force. We have a very expensive labor force, but we also create some of the best products ever seen. Okay. That is what we need as a country. This is what we need. This is what the president is trying to do. And yes, I know there are so many people saying, off on this, he can do no wrong. And then there are other people over here saying he can do no right. What I'm saying is, let's go right down the middle. Okay. He's not perfect. And he had, I'll be honest with you, when I started researching about tariffs, because everybody was throwing a fit about it. So I started reading into it. Well, the first thing I went to was the Constitution. And the first thing I read was he doesn't have that power. And I was like, oh no. Oh no. So far he's operated completely according to the Constitution. And I'm like, oh no. Now we've got an illegal act. And well, then I started reading other people's blogs and other people's thing. And then I started reading the laws and then I started researching a little more and I was like, whoa, he's acting like he should. He's fulfilling his oath to the American people. And because of that, yes, he's levying tariffs, but we have laws and we have decisions by the Supreme Court that say those laws are legal. And we also have rulings by the Supreme Court that says that Congress can give him those abilities. And here we are. And he's done it and he's doing it. So I know. I know. I really do. I do understand. It's scary. But we can't allow the talking heads from both sides to intimidate us, to scare us, and to pull the fear. That's why I try to use the let's don't do fear. How about let's okay? And the facts are that according to the United States Constitution and the way it was written, Congress can delegate their authority and place it on whoever they choose. And in this case, when it comes to the levying of tariffs and the using it as a negotiating tool, they have given that power to the president. Doesn't matter who's in office. Every president since the passage of these laws has had that power, whether they used it or whether they didn't. They've all had that power. And the ones to come after this current president will have that power until or unless Congress would write another law and send it to the president to be signed that would limit his powers when it comes to tariffs. And they may do that. I don't know. I can't see the future. If they do, then they do. And, they have ways to make sure that that becomes a law. And that's the veto power. The president can choose not to sign it, and then it goes back to Congress. And if they get a certain amount of votes, and I'm not sure off the top of my head how many that is, I would actually have to look in the Constitution. Then, if they get that many votes, they can enact it that way by veto power. They can veto the president. Interesting little scenario there, isn't it? But they have to, I mean, and honestly, it has to be, it's a very large majority. So you would have to get members of the opposing party to go along with you in order to do that. I know that there are certain congressmen currently, senators, and also House members who say that the president doesn't have these powers. Well, they need to, before they open their mouth, they need to do the research the law and research their own power, their own acts that came from their own Congress and that were signed by the president. So therefore, they became law. And then the Supreme Court took up the act and said, you know what? The cases that they've had on those on those acts and on those laws, they've said yes, they're legal. President can do that. So that is a less than 45-minute discussion on tariffs, according to just about a 3-hour search online that I did. Please comment, share this if you like the content, share it with others, and let's try to alleviate the fear that we all are being hammered with, and let's just deal with facts. And the facts are the president of the United States, whether a Democrat, Republican, or an independent, can levy tariffs under certain circumstances, which the tariffs that have been levied fall under these acts, under these laws that were passed by Congress. I haven't found one yet that doesn't. And they're not just quoting them to have something to say. They're quoting them because that's the ones that they fall under. So let's make sure that when we're talking about this, we're talking with knowledge, okay? Not just fear, not just hate, but facts. And be sure that you come back. Like I said, like, follow, subscribe, click that little bell so you get your notifications of when our next video will be posted. And be sure to comment. If you have something you want to say, please comment. Please. And look these up. Check my links and look them up. Let's see what we got. All right? All right. I'll talk to you all later. And thank you for tuning in to this episode of Let's Talk. Have a great day.